When my daughter told me to find somewhere else to die, that I was useless, now I packed my bags like the obedient mother I'd always been. 3 days later, I was sitting in a lawyer's office discovering my supposedly loving husband had played the longest game of chess in history. Victoria was about to learn that sometimes the pawn becomes the queen. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me tell you how I went from homeless widow to the woman holding all the cards. Because, honey, this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. 2 months ago, I was Margaret Sullivan, devoted wife of 43 years and mother to one spectacularly ungrateful daughter. When Robert died of a heart attack at 71, I thought my world was ending. Not just because I'd lost my husband, but because suddenly the carefully constructed reality I'd lived in for 4 decades was dissolving around me. The day they called from the hospital, I was preparing Robert's favorite dinner, pot roast with carrots and those little red potatoes he loved. I just pulled the roast from the oven when the phone rang. The doctor's voice was gentle but firm. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm very sorry to tell you." I didn't hear much after that, just fragments. "Massive cardiac event. Nothing we could do." Already gone when he arrived. I remember standing in our kitchen, the heat from the oven still warming my legs, a dish towel clutched in my hands, thinking, what do I do now? Not just about dinner, but about everything. For 43 years, Robert had made every major decision in our lives. Where we lived, how we invested, what car to drive, even what we watched on television most nights. Victoria swooped in during my grief like a vulture in designer clothes, cooing about how difficult this must be for me. Her Louboutin heels clicking across our hardwood floors, the diamond tennis bracelet Robert had given her for her 35th birthday catching the light as she patted my shoulder. "Mom, you can't possibly manage this big house alone," she'd said, her voice dripping with fake concern. The stairs, the maintenance, all those memories. It's not healthy. I should have seen the calculation behind her concern, the way her eyes darted around the living room, mentally rearranging furniture, already claiming the space as her own. But grief has a way of clouding your judgment, of making you trust people you shouldn't. Victoria had always been Robert's favorite, his little princess, who could do no wrong. When she married that investment banker Kevin and started producing grandchildren, Robert doted on them all. He never missed a dance recital or soccer game, never failed to slip a crisp $100 bill into birthday cards. Meanwhile, I was just the woman who cooked and cleaned and kept everything running smoothly, invisible support staff to their sparkling family narrative. After the funeral, a tasteful affair at St. Michael's, with just the right number of lilies and a reception at our house catered by the company Victoria recommended, she became increasingly insistent about my situation. She'd arrive unannounced, designer sunglasses perched on her head, carrying bags from Whole Foods filled with organic produce I hadn't asked for. "You need to eat properly, Mom," she'd say, inspecting my refrigerator with a slight grimace. "Dad would want you to take care of yourself." She'd bring Kevin over for family dinners where they'd corner me with real estate pamphlets and retirement community brochures. "Mom, these places are wonderful. You'd have people your own age, activities, no responsibilities." What they meant was no inheritance to split, no inconvenient mother to deal with. The glossy brochures showed smiling seniors playing cards and doing water aerobics, but all I could see was the future they'd planned for me, tucked away and forgotten while they enjoyed the fruits of Robert's labors. The final blow came last Tuesday. I'd been living in what Victoria now called our house for 6 weeks since Robert's death, still sleeping in the guest room because I couldn't bear to pack up our bedroom. The master suite remained exactly as it had been the morning Robert left for his final golf game. His reading glasses on the nightstand, the Wall Street Journal folded precisely in half, his slippers aligned at the foot of the bed. Victoria arrived unannounced with Kevin and 2 large suitcases. The sound of their BMW pulling into the driveway sent a chill through me before I even saw their faces. Kevin's expression was carefully neutral as he hefted the luggage from the trunk, but Victoria's held something I'd never seen directed at me before. Impatience tinged with disdain, as if I were a problem that had lingered too long. "Mom, we've made a decision. Kevin got the promotion, and we need to move into town immediately. This house is perfect for us." I stared at her, not quite comprehending. The sunlight streaming through the bay windows highlighted the platinum highlights in her expertly colored hair. $300 every 6 weeks at a salon in the city paid for by Robert's credit card that she was still using. Move in. But this is my home. Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation underneath. Her perfect lips tightened the corners, pulling down in an expression that reminded me with a jolt of Robert when he was displeased with the service at a restaurant. Actually, Mom, according to Dad's will, I inherited everything. The house, the investments, all of it. I've been letting you stay here out of kindness, but it's time for you to find your own place. The words hit me like a physical blow, my hand automatically reaching for the wall to steady myself. I felt dizzy, the carefully polished hardwood floor beneath me suddenly unstable. Victoria, surely there's been some mistake. Your father wouldn't, he couldn't. Her laugh was brittle like ice, a cracking on a frozen pond. No mistake. Dad knew I'd take better care of his legacy than you ever could. You never understood money or investments. You were just the wife. Just the wife. 43 years reduced to those 3 words. The countless dinners, prepared clothes, washed and ironed, social engagements, arranged silent support during business crises, quiet comfort during health scares. All of it dismissed as insignificant contribution. That's when she delivered the killing blow, stepping closer so I could smell her expensive perfume, Chanel number 5, Robert's Christmas gift to her every year since she turned 16. Find somewhere else to die. You're useless now. The cruelty of it stole my breath. Not just the words themselves, but the casual way she delivered them, as if telling me we were out of coffee. In that moment, I finally saw my daughter clearly. Not as the little girl whose skinned knees I had bandaged or whose tears I had dried, but as the stranger she had become, or perhaps had always been. I packed my things in a daze, 43 years of marriage fitting into 2 suitcases and a small box of photos. I moved mechanically, selecting essentials with the efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime anticipating others' needs. Toiletries, medications, 3 practical outfits. The pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary, the only jewelry I owned worth more than a few $100s. Victoria watched from the doorway, checking her watch like I was making her late for something important. Her fingers tapped impatiently against the doorframe, manicured nails clicking a rhythm that seemed to say, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. There's a nice senior complex on Maple Street, she offered with the enthusiasm of someone recommending a decent restaurant. Very affordable. I'm sure they have openings. Affordable. My daughter was inheriting $33 million and she was suggesting I check into what was essentially a welfare facility for the elderly. The place on Maple Street, I'd driven past it many times. Gray concrete building with tiny windows and a chain-link fence around a courtyard the size of our master bathroom. Kevin loaded my suitcases into their BMW with the efficiency of someone disposing of garbage. His movements were quick, avoiding eye contact as if my presence had become contaminating. The same man who had called me Mom for 15 years, who had enthusiastically accepted my Christmas sweaters and birthday cakes, now couldn't bear to look at me. Margaret, you'll love having your independence again, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. No more worrying about house maintenance or property taxes. No more home, he meant. No more security. No more belonging. As we drove away, I watched my house, Robert's house, Victoria's house now, disappear in the rearview mirror. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 4 decades making that house a home, hosting Victoria's birthday parties, nursing Robert through his illnesses, maintaining every detail he cared about. The garden I'd planted, the kitchen I'd remodeled to Robert's specifications, the dining room where I'd served over 15,000 meals. Now I was being driven to a budget motel like an unwanted guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The Sunset Inn was exactly what you'd expect from a place charging $40 a night. Thin walls, thinner towels, and a carpet that had seen better decades. The bedspread was a faded floral pattern with cigarette burns carefully positioned over faded roses. The bathroom featured cracked tiles and a shower that wheezed rather than sprayed. Victoria handed me $200 in cash like she was tipping a hotel maid. 4 crisp 50s folded neatly in half. This should cover you for a few days while you get settled. I'll have Kevin transfer some money into your account once we sort through Dad's paperwork. Some money from my own inheritance. The inheritance I apparently didn't have. After they left, I sat on the sagging mattress and tried to process what had just happened. In the span of 3 hours, I'd gone from grieving widow to homeless senior citizen. The woman I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for had discarded me like an expired prescription. Outside my window, the neon Sunset Inn sign flickered, casting an intermittent red glow across the room. Cars passed on the highway, their headlights briefly illuminating the water stain on the ceiling that resembled the state of Texas. In the next room, a couple argued about money, their voices rising and falling like a tide of recrimination. But as I sat there in that depressing motel room, something began nagging at me, something that didn't add up. Robert had always been meticulous about his affairs, obsessively organized about important documents. His home office was a testament to precision, files labeled and color-coded receipts organized by date, and category warranties filed with the original packaging information. He'd shown me the will years ago, explaining his wishes, making sure I understood everything. I couldn't remember the exact details. Robert had always handled the finances, insisting it wasn't something I needed to worry about. But I was absolutely certain that's not what it had said. The Robert who'd held my hand through my mother's death, who'd surprised me with flowers every anniversary without fail, wouldn't have left me destitute. I reached for my purse, a sensible leather bag that Victoria had once called tragically practical, and pulled out my phone. The screen was cracked from when I dropped it at the funeral, too numb with grief to notice it fall from my pocket. Robert would have replaced it immediately. Victoria had suggested I learn to live on a budget. The next morning, I used the motel's Wi-Fi to search for Robert's attorney, Harrison Fitzgerald, the same lawyer who'd handled our house purchase and various business matters over the years. The connection was spotty, cutting out every few minutes, forcing me to restart the search multiple times. Finally, I found the number for Fitzgerald and Associates. His office was downtown, a 20-minute bus ride that cost me precious cash from Victoria's generous parting gift, but felt necessary. The bus smelled of disinfectant and fast food. A young mother struggled with a stroller while her toddler screamed. An elderly man dozed in the priority seating, his cane propped between his knees. I caught my reflection in the window. Pale, drawn, a woman suddenly aged beyond her years. I barely recognized myself. Fitzgerald and Associates occupied the 12th floor of a glass and steel building, the kind Robert had always admired. Solid construction, he'd say, pointing out such buildings as we drove through the city. Built to last. The reception area featured leather furniture and discreet lighting, photographs of local landmarks in black and white frames. The receptionist, a young woman with an immaculate blouse and perfect posture, looked up as I approached. "I'd like to see Harrison Fitzgerald, please. About my husband's estate. Robert Sullivan." Her professional smile flickered for just a moment. "Mrs. Sullivan. One moment, please." She spoke quietly into her phone, her eyes darting to me with barely concealed curiosity. When she hung up, her smile had returned, more genuine than before. "Mr. Fitzgerald will see you right away. Please follow me." Harrison Fitzgerald was a distinguished man in his 70s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. When his secretary announced that Mrs. Sullivan was here about her husband's estate, he looked genuinely surprised. The surprise quickly gave way to concern as he rose from behind his imposing desk. "Margaret, my dear, I was wondering when you'd come in. I tried calling your house several times, but Victoria said you were traveling." Traveling? The lie landed like another slap. That's what my daughter had told him while I was languishing in a roadside motel, as if I'd jetted off to Europe or gone on a cruise while mourning my husband of 4 decades. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I need to ask you about Robert's will." He looked puzzled, removing his glasses and polishing them with a monogrammed handkerchief. "Of course. Didn't Victoria provide you with your copy?" I gave her the original and several copies after the reading. My stomach dropped. The air in the office suddenly seemed thin, insufficient. "There was a reading, Margaret, you were supposed to be there. Victoria said you were too distraught, that she'd handle everything and make sure you received your inheritance." The blood drained from my face as the reality hit me. My own daughter had deliberately excluded me from my husband's will. Reading had lied to the attorney, had orchestrated this entire situation. "Mr. Fitzgerald, sorry, I was never told about any reading. Victoria told me she inherited everything." Harrison Fitzgerald's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. He reached for a thick file folder, his movements suddenly urgent. The gold signet ring he'd worn for as long as I'd known him caught the light as he flipped through pages with practiced efficiency. "Margaret, that's impossible. Your husband's will is very specific about your inheritance." He pulled out a document with a blue cover. I recognized Robert's neat signature at the bottom, the same careful script that had signed anniversary cards and permission slips and mortgage documents. witnessed and notarized on March 15th, just 6 months before his death. But as Harrison began reading, I realized Victoria had lied about everything. The words washed over me, each phrase, a revelation, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. I, Robert James Sullivan, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife Margaret Ann Sullivan the following our primary residence at 847 Oakwood Drive, including all furnishings and personal effects. My home. My home that I'd been evicted from just yesterday. Additionally, I leave her 70% of all financial assets, investments, and accounts totaling approximately $23 million. My head started spinning. $23 million. The house. 70% of everything. The room tilted slightly, and I gripped the arms of my chair to steady myself. Harrison continued reading, his voice growing more serious with each word. To my daughter, Victoria Sullivan Hayes, I leave $10 million to be held in trust with distributions beginning on her 45th birthday, contingent upon her treatment of her mother following my death. Contingent upon her treatment of me. Robert had known. Somehow he'd known exactly what Victoria would try to do. Mr. Fitzgerald. I whispered, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. Victoria told me I inherited nothing. She moved into my house yesterday. She gave me $200 and suggested I find a senior facility. The elderly lawyer's face flushed with anger, the first time I'd ever seen him lose his professional composure. In 30 years of association with Harrison Fitzgerald, he'd always been the epitome of restrained dignity. Now he looked as if he might throw something. Margaret, what Victoria has done is called elder abuse and fraud. She's committed multiple felonies. But she had legal documents. She showed me papers, forged most likely, or documents from an earlier draft. Your husband updated his will 6 months before his death, specifically because he was concerned about Victoria's attitude toward money and her sense of entitlement. The room was spinning. All those times Victoria had dismissed my opinions, talked over me during family dinners, rolled her eyes when I tried to contribute to conversations about their expensive vacations or Kevin's business deals. Robert had been watching, evaluating, making decisions. There's more, Margaret. Harrison's voice had taken on a tone I'd never heard before. Something between satisfaction and vindication, like a chess player seeing the perfect move unfold. The trust provision for Victoria specifically states that if she fails to treat you with respect and dignity following Robert's death, the entire $10 million reverts to you instead. I stared at him in shock, unable to process what he was saying. The implications seemed too enormous to grasp. Are you saying I'm saying your daughter just cost herself $10 million? Her inheritance is now yours as well. You're not inheriting $23 million, Margaret. You're inheriting $33 million plus the house and all personal property. The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. Victoria had been so eager to claim her inheritance that she'd triggered the exact clause designed to protect me from her greed. I felt a hysterical laugh building in my chest and swallowed it down. What do I do now? I asked, my voice barely steady. Harrison smiled, and for the first time since Robert's death, I saw genuine warmth directed at me. Not pity, not condescension, but respect. Now, my dear, we call the police about the fraud, and then we call Victoria and inform her that she's about to receive the shock of her life. Can she fight this? With what money she's about to discover that every account she thought she controlled actually belongs to you. Every investment, every bank account, every asset except your house is frozen pending investigation of her fraudulent activities. I thought about Victoria in my house, probably already planning renovations, shopping for new furniture with money she thought was hers. Kevin was probably calculating how the inheritance would affect his investment portfolio, which stocks to buy, which properties to acquire. They had no idea that in about 6 hours their entire world was going to implode. Harrison Fitzgerald's office became command central for what he cheerfully called Operation Justice. He contacted the police, the banks, and a private investigator while I sat in his leather chair still processing the magnitude of Victoria's deception. Detective Rodriguez arrived within the hour, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense manner and a notebook she consulted frequently. She examined the forged documents Victoria had shown me, comparing them with the original will. These forgeries are quite sophisticated, Detective Rodriguez explained as she reviewed the papers. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. Someone planned this carefully. You think Victoria had help? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Almost certainly. Creating convincing legal forgeries requires specific knowledge and connections. We'll need to investigate whether Kevin or someone in his financial network was involved. Within 2 hours, every account had been frozen. Victoria's credit cards linked to what she thought were her new inheritance accounts were declined at Neiman Marcus, according to the bank's fraud department. The house utilities, which she'd already transferred to her name, were suspended pending ownership verification. The caterers she'd hired for a housewarming party that weekend canceled when her payment didn't process. My phone rang at exactly 3:47 p.m. Victoria's name flashed on the screen, the contact photo showing her at her most polished. Hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless, smile practiced. I took a deep breath and answered, putting the call on speaker so Harrison and Detective Rodriguez could hear. Mom, where are you? There's some kind of mix-up with the bank accounts. They're saying Daddy's assets are frozen. Her voice was tight with barely controlled panic. In the background, I could hear what sounded like a sales associate apologizing. Hello, Victoria. I'm sitting in Harrison Fitzgerald's office. You remember him, Daddy's attorney, the one who read the real will to an empty room while you told him I was traveling? Silence, then the sound of movement, a door closing. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was lower, more controlled. Mom, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I discovered that you're a liar and a thief, sweetheart. I also discovered that your father was much smarter than either of us realized. You don't understand. I was protecting you from the complexity of managing all that money. You've never had to deal with investments, or I understand perfectly. You forged legal documents, committed fraud, and threw your 67-year-old mother out of her own house because you thought I was too stupid to notice. Her voice turned sharp, desperate. Mom, you're confused. The grief has been overwhelming and someone is obviously taking advantage of your emotional state. The audacity was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, Victoria was trying to manipulate me to gaslight me into believing I was the one with the problem. For a moment, I felt a flicker of my old self. The woman who would have apologized, who would have tried to smooth things over, who would have accepted blame to keep the peace. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who finally saw the truth with perfect clarity. Victoria, dear, let me clarify something for you. Not only did you never inherit anything but your actual inheritance, the 10 million your father left you is now mine as well, thanks to a lovely clause he included about treating me with dignity and respect. That's impossible. Detective Rodriguez is sitting right here if you'd like to discuss the impossibility of fraud charges with her. The phone went quiet. I could almost hear Victoria's mind racing, calculating, searching for an angle, a loophole, a way to turn the situation to her advantage. When she spoke again, her voice had transformed into the wheedling tone she'd used as a teenager when asking to borrow the car. Mom, please, can we meet somewhere and talk about this reasonably? I'm sure we can work something out. Oh, we'll definitely be meeting soon. At the courthouse when you're arraigned. You wouldn't dare press charges against your own daughter. Something cold and final crystallized in my chest. A lifetime of accommodating, of smoothing rough edges, of making things easier for everyone else at my own expense. All of it fell away, leaving behind a clarity I'd never experienced before. Watch me. I hung up and looked at Harrison, who was beaming with approval. Detective Rodriguez was already on her phone coordinating with officers to execute an arrest warrant. How long before she's arrested, I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Detective Rodriguez has enough evidence for a warrant. They'll pick her up this evening. And Kevin, his financial records are being subpoenaed. If he participated in creating those documents, he'll face charges too. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Mom, please don't do this. Think about the grandchildren. I showed the message to Detective Rodriguez, who smiled grimly. Emotional manipulation, classic behavior pattern for this type of crime. I typed back, I am thinking about them. They deserve to see what happens when you steal from family. 20 minutes later, Kevin called. His voice held none of Victoria's desperate edge, just the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to talking his way out of difficult situations. Margaret, surely we can resolve this privately. Victoria made some poor decisions, but involving the police seems excessive. Kevin, did you help her forge those documents? That's not. Margaret, you have to understand the pressure Victoria was under. She was worried about your mental state, your ability to handle large sums of money. So that's a yes, it wasn't malicious. She genuinely believed she was protecting you. By throwing me out of my house and telling me to find somewhere to die, Kevin was quiet. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of his complicity. Kevin, here's what's going to happen. You're both going to be arrested. You're both going to face federal fraud charges. And I'm going to be sitting in my house, watching it all unfold. Margaret, please be reasonable. I was reasonable for 43 years. It didn't work out well for me. The police arrested Victoria at 8:30 p.m. while she was having dinner at Leonard's, apparently celebrating her inheritance with Kevin and another couple. According to Detective Rodriguez, who called to inform me, she screamed about false arrest and demanded to call her lawyer, who turned out to be Kevin's golf buddy with a specialty in tax law and no experience with criminal defense. Kevin was arrested at his office the next morning. The forensic accountant had traced the forged documents to a printing company Kevin's firm used for creating investment prospectuses. Apparently, my son-in-law had quite the criminal resume that Victoria either didn't know about or chose to ignore. I spent my first night back in my house, sleeping in the master bedroom. Victoria had already moved her belongings into the space, replacing Robert's careful organization with her chaos of designer clothes and expensive cosmetics. I packed everything into garbage bags and left them on the front porch. Let her collect them when she makes bail. The house felt different now, not because Robert was gone, but because I was finally seeing it as mine. For decades, I'd maintained it as Robert's sanctuary, designed around his preferences, his needs, his vision of how we should live. The heavy mahogany furniture he'd insisted on, the hunter green walls in the study that I'd secretly always hated, the formal dining room we used 3 times a year at most. Now, looking around with clear eyes, I realized how little of me had ever been reflected in these rooms. That was about to change. Harrison called around noon with updates, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of a man who enjoys seeing justice served. Victoria's bail is set at $50,000. Since all her accounts are frozen, she'll have to find someone else to cover it. What about Kevin, $200,000? Apparently, the judge wasn't impressed with his history of financial crimes. Who knew your son-in-law had been under investigation for securities fraud? I certainly hadn't known. But then again, I'd been excluded from most family financial discussions. Victoria and Kevin had always spoken to me like I was a child when money came up, simplifying concepts they assumed I couldn't understand. They were about to learn how much I'd actually understood and how much more I was capable of learning. Harrison, I want to make some changes to the house. Victoria had contractors lined up to renovate. Indeed, I found their estimates in the financial records. Quite extravagant plans. I'd like to proceed with some of those plans, but with my own vision. Excellent idea. It's your home now, Margaret. Do whatever makes you happy. What made me happy, I realized, was the idea of undoing every assumption Victoria had made about my inheritance. She'd planned to gut the kitchen, replace the hardwood floors with marble, and convert Robert's study into a wine cellar. I was going to keep the hardwood, they just needed refinishing, and turn the study into an art studio. I'd always wanted to paint, but Robert had considered it an impractical hobby. My phone rang again. Unknown number. Mrs. Sullivan, this is Janet Cooper from Channel 7 News. We understand you're the victim of a significant elder fraud case involving your daughter. Would you be willing to share your story? Word was getting out. In a city this size, the arrest of a prominent investment banker and his wife for defrauding his elderly mother-in-law was news. The kind of salacious story that would lead the local broadcasts and possibly go national. Miss Cooper, I appreciate your interest, but I'm not ready to make public statements. I understand this must be difficult, but your story could help other seniors recognize warning signs of family financial abuse. Your experience might prevent others from suffering similar betrayals. She had a point. How many other women my age were being manipulated by adult children who saw them as inconvenient obstacles to inheritance? How many were being gaslighted into believing they couldn't manage their own affairs, pressured into giving up their homes, their independence, their dignity? If I decided to tell my story, would I have control over how it's presented? Absolutely. We could arrange a sit-down interview where you'd have approval over the final edit. Your story deserves to be told with dignity and respect. I thought about Victoria probably sitting in a jail cell right now, still believing this was all a misunderstanding she could charm her way out of. Still convinced that her mother was the problem, not her own actions. Miss Cooper, let me get back to you. I might have quite a story to tell. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of the expensive wine Kevin had sent us for Christmas. Wine I was apparently now drinking in my own house, purchased with my own money while contemplating whether to publicly humiliate my daughter on television. Life had certainly taken an interesting turn. The doorbell rang at 7:00 a.m. sharp the next morning. Through the window, I could see Victoria on my front porch wearing yesterday's clothes and looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. Her perfectly highlighted hair was limp, her makeup smudged. She'd made bail somehow, probably from her mother-in-law who'd always treated Victoria like the daughter she never had. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. The morning air was cool against my face, carrying the scent of the roses I'd planted along the walkway years ago. Victoria's expression cycled rapidly through relief, anxiety, and calculation. "Mom, please, we need to talk. We talked yesterday. You told me to find somewhere to eat. I found somewhere to live instead." Victoria's eyes were red-rimmed, her usual perfect composure completely shattered. Her hands twisted together in front of her, the diamond on her ring finger catching the morning light. "I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I'm still your daughter. Are you—" Because daughters don't typically forge legal documents to steal their mother's inheritances. I wasn't stealing. I was— She stopped, clearly struggling to find words that didn't sound criminal. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish suddenly finding itself on dry land. "You were what, Victoria? I was trying to protect you from making poor financial decisions. You've never managed large amounts of money." Even now, even after being arrested for fraud, she couldn't admit the truth. In Victoria's mind, she was still the victim of my unreasonable expectations, still justified in her actions, still the hero of her own story. "Victoria, let me share something your father told me 6 months before he died. He said he was worried about your sense of entitlement, your attitude toward money, and how you treated people you considered beneath you." Her face went pale beneath her makeup, a flicker of genuine fear crossing her features for the first time. "Daddy never said that. He said you reminded him of his sister Eleanor. Beautiful, charming, and completely incapable of thinking about anyone but yourself. He told me he was changing the will specifically because he was afraid of what you'd do to me if you had control." "That's a lie." I pulled out my phone and showed her a video file Harrison had given me. Robert's final message recorded with the new will to be played if Victoria ever contested the inheritance or if she treated me poorly after his death. "Actually, it's not. Your father recorded a video message explaining his decision to be played if you ever contested the will or if you treated me poorly after his death." Victoria stared at the phone like it was a poisonous snake about to strike. The color had drained completely from her face, leaving even her lips bloodless. "He knew, sweetheart. He knew exactly who you were underneath all that charm. The only thing he didn't predict was how far you'd actually go." "Play it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I touched the screen, and Robert's voice filled the morning air, clear, measured, and absolutely devastating. My husband speaking from beyond the grave, his words precisely aimed at our daughter's heart. "If you're hearing this, Victoria, it means my fears about your character were justified. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped that my daughter had more integrity than I suspected. But if Margaret is playing this recording, it means you've proven me right in the worst possible way." Victoria sank onto the porch steps as Robert's voice continued, her legs seeming to give out beneath her. Her hand covered her mouth, but it couldn't stop the small wounded sound that escaped. "I spent 43 years watching your mother sacrifice her dreams, her ambitions, her independence to take care of our family. She worked part-time jobs to help pay for your college while I built my business. She postponed her education, gave up career opportunities, and poured herself into being the wife and mother she thought we needed." The recording continued for 3 more minutes, each word carefully chosen, each sentence a scalpel cutting through Victoria's justifications and self-deceptions. Robert's voice was calm but resolute, laying out exactly why he'd structured the will as he had, why he'd felt the need to protect me from our own daughter. "By the time you hear this, you'll have discovered that treating your mother poorly has cost you everything. I hope it was worth it." When it ended, Victoria was crying. Not the pretty tears she'd used to manipulate people since childhood, but ugly broken sobs that shook her entire body. Mascara streaked her cheeks, her nose was red and running her carefully constructed facade completely shattered. "He hated me," she whispered, looking younger suddenly, like the child who'd once sought approval from a father who was often too busy to notice. "No, Victoria. He loved you enough to hope you'd prove him wrong. You chose to prove him right instead. She looked up at me, her expression raw with a pain I'd never seen her acknowledge before, a pain she'd probably carried for years beneath her perfect exterior. What happens now? Now you face the consequences of your choices. The fraud charges, the investigation, the public humiliation when this story hits the news. The News Channel 7 wants to interview me about elder financial abuse. I'm thinking of saying yes. Victoria's face crumpled completely, the last vestiges of her composure disintegrating like wet tissue paper. Mom, please think about what this will do to the grandchildren, to Kevin's career, to our whole family. I am thinking about it. I'm thinking about how you didn't consider any of those things when you decided to commit multiple felonies. She stood up slowly, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen her. The morning sunlight was harsh on her face, illuminating every line of stress and fear. I know you won't believe this, but I never meant for it to go this far. I wanted the money. I wanted the security, the status. I wanted to never have to worry about anything again. For the first time since this nightmare began, Victoria was telling the truth. Not a partial truth wrapped in justification, not an explanation designed to minimize her actions, but the simple, unvarnished reality of her greed. I believe you, sweetheart. But wanting something doesn't justify destroying people to get it. She nodded, tears still flowing, smearing what remained of her makeup. In her disheveled state, without the armor of her perfect appearance, she looked vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since she was very young. What can I do to fix this? You can start by admitting what you did was wrong. Not misguided, not protective, not complicated. Wrong. Victoria took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling with the effort of honesty. It was wrong. It was completely, unforgivably wrong. And then you can face whatever consequences come next with some dignity instead of trying to manipulate your way out of them. Victoria looked at me for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time not the pushover mother she'd always known, but the woman who had just outmaneuvered her completely. The woman who had been there all along beneath the accommodating exterior. I deserved this, didn't I? Yes, Victoria. You absolutely did. As I closed the door, watching her walk back to the taxi waiting at the curb, I felt neither triumph nor satisfaction. Just a quiet certainty that sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms. And sometimes the pawn really does become the queen. 3 days after Victoria's porch confession, Kevin's mother showed up at my door. Eleanor Hayes was everything I'd expected. Perfectly coiffed, dripping with jewelry, and radiating the kind of entitlement that only comes from 3 generations of inherited wealth. Her cashmere coat probably cost more than the entire contents of my closet, and her designer handbag gleamed with the superior polish of genuine Italian leather. I'd never met her before, despite Victoria and Kevin's 15-year marriage. She'd always been traveling during family gatherings, a convenient excuse that now seemed calculated rather than coincidental. Eleanor had once sent Victoria a string of pearls for Christmas with a note explaining they were a family heirloom for real Hayeses, pointedly excluding me from that category despite sharing her grandchildren's blood. Margaret, we need to discuss this situation rationally. Her voice carried the practiced authority of someone accustomed to issuing commands disguised as suggestions. I invited her in, curious to see what version of reality the Hayes family had constructed to explain their son's felony charges. Would she apologize for his behavior, attempt to negotiate, or simply try to bully me into submission? Eleanor settled herself in my living room like she was granting me an audience, perching on the edge of the sofa, back ramrod straight, her Hermes scarf arranged just so. She declined my offer of tea with a dismissive wave, as if accepting hospitality might somehow weaken her position. Kevin made some poor choices, obviously, but prosecuting him seems rather vindictive. Don't you think, vindictive? The word hung in the air between us, vibrating with the audacity of her perspective. Your son helped steal my inheritance and threw me out of my own house. Kevin was following Victoria's lead. He didn't understand the full situation. The woman was actually trying to blame my daughter for her son's criminal behavior. I had to admire the audacity. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 mothers, each unwilling to accept the fundamental flaws in the child they'd raised. But there was a critical difference. Victoria had committed fraud. I wasn't denying it. Mrs. Hayes' Kevin created forged legal documents. That's not following someone's lead. That's conspiracy to commit fraud. Eleanor adjusted her scarf, a nervous tell that betrayed her polished exterior. A diamond tennis bracelet glinted at her wrist as her hand moved, catching the light filtering through my curtains. Curtains I was planning to replace as soon as possible. Kevin's lawyer believes we can reach a settlement that benefits everyone. You get your house back. Victoria faces appropriate consequences. And Kevin avoids the publicity of a trial. Appropriate consequences. As if Victoria's crimes were a minor etiquette violation like using the wrong fork at dinner or failing to send a thank you note. What kind of settlement? Eleanor smiled clearly, believing she'd found an opening. The expression didn't reach her eyes, which remained calculating and cold. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice as if sharing a confidence between equals. Kevin's family is prepared to compensate you for your inconvenience. Let's say $2 million in exchange for dropping the charges against Kevin. $2 million to forgive the man who'd helped steal $33 million from me. The offer was so insulting it was almost laughable. Did she think I was that desperate, that easily bought Mrs. Hayes? Your son participated in a scheme that cost me everything I own. You think $2 million covers that, Margaret? Be realistic. Kevin has a career, children, a reputation to maintain. Sending him to prison serves no one. It serves justice. Eleanor's polished facade cracked slightly. A flash of genuine anger crossed her features before she regained control, smoothing her expression back into aristocratic disdain. Justice? You're destroying multiple families over money you'd never have known how to manage anyway. There it was, the same condescending attitude that had poisoned my relationship with Victoria. In their world, I was just the help who got always uppity, who dared to claim what they believed rightfully belonged to people of their caliber, people who understood money, people who mattered. Mrs. Hayes, I think we're done here. Eleanor stood, reaching into her purse to withdraw a checkbook. The leather cover was embossed with the Hayes family crest, a pretension that spoke volumes about how she viewed her place in the world. Margaret, please reconsider. $5 million. Final offer. $5 million to let Kevin walk free. The amount was staggering to someone who'd spent decades carefully budgeting for groceries and utility bills. But the principle was non-negotiable. Some betrayals couldn't be erased with a checkbook. My answer is no. Eleanor stood, her composure completely restored. She slipped the checkbook back into her purse with deliberate movements, her eyes never leaving mine. Very well, but you should know that Kevin's legal team has found some interesting information about your husband's business practices. It would be unfortunate if that became public during the trial. The threat was clear, but I felt no fear, only curiosity. Robert had always been private about his business dealings, insisting I didn't need to worry myself about the details. Had there been something hidden beneath his careful exterior? Something that could change everything? What kind of information? The kind that might make you reconsider who the real criminal in this situation was. With that parting shot, Eleanor Hayes glided out of my living room, leaving behind only the lingering scent of her expensive perfume and a cloud of uncertainty that settled over me like a shroud. After she left, I called Harrison immediately. His secretary put me through without delay, a courtesy I was still getting used to after decades of being treated as an afterthought. Harrison, Kevin's mother, just threatened me. She claims they have information about Robert's business practices that could damage his reputation. I heard papers shuffling on the other end of the line, followed by the creaking of Harrison's leather chair. A hesitation that lasted a beat too long. Margaret, whatever they think they found, it doesn't change the facts of Victoria and Kevin's crimes. But could it affect the case potentially? If they can muddy the waters enough, create doubt about Robert's character or business practices, it might influence a jury. People are often willing to believe the worst about successful men. I thought about Robert, about our marriage, about all the secrets that might be buried in 43 years of shared life. Had I ever really known him? Or had I simply accepted the version of himself he chose to present Harrison? I want to know everything about Robert's business. Every deal, every partnership, every potential irregularity. Margaret, are you sure? Sometimes the past is better left alone. Robert was a good man regardless of any business decisions he may have made. The Hayes family is threatening to drag Robert's memory through the mud to protect their criminal son. I'd rather know the truth first. That evening, I sat in Robert's study, my study now, and began going through his files systematically. The room still smelled faintly of his cologne. that distinctive blend of sandalwood and citrus he'd worn for as long as I could remember. The leather chair creaked beneath me, conforming to my body differently than it had to his. Robert had been meticulously organized, every document dated and categorized. Tax returns in one drawer, investment statements in another, business contracts in a third. Each folder labeled in his precise handwriting, color-coded by year and importance. But as I dug deeper into his business records, I began finding things that didn't quite make sense. Payments to shell companies with vague names like Oceanic Consulting and Summit Strategic Partners. Consulting fees that seemed excessive even for high-level corporate work. Partnerships with firms that appeared to exist only on paper, with addresses that led to vacant lots or mail forwarding services. In the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet behind a false panel, I discovered only by accident, when the drawer stuck, I found a separate set of books. These weren't labeled in Robert's handwriting, but typed on adhesive labels: executive accounts and special projects. By midnight, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my husband. The numbers didn't lie. Money moved through Robert's consulting firm in patterns that couldn't be explained by legitimate business. Massive sums appearing and disappearing, filtered through layers of shell companies, emerging clean on the other side. The private investigator Harrison recommended was a sharp-eyed woman named Carol Chen, who specialized in financial crimes. She arrived at 9 the next morning dressed in a no-nonsense pantsuit with practical shoes and a laptop case that had seen better days. No pretensions, no airs, just professional competence that immediately put me at ease. She spent 6 hours in Robert's study photographing documents and building what she called the real picture of my husband's business empire. When she finally emerged, her expression was grave. She set her laptop on the kitchen table, turning the screen to show me a complex flowchart of companies and money transfers. "Mrs. Sullivan, your husband was running a sophisticated money laundering operation through his consulting firm. We're talking about millions of dollars in illegal transactions over the past decade." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The kitchen tilted slightly around me, the familiar surroundings suddenly alien and threatening. "That's impossible. Robert was the most honest man I knew. I'm sorry, but the evidence is overwhelming. He was washing money for organized crime families using his legitimate business as a front." I stared at the documents spread across the table. Invoices for services never rendered. Consulting contracts with companies that didn't exist. Payment schedules that corresponded with known criminal activities, detailed in newspaper clippings Carol had brought with her. How long has this been going on? Based on these records, at least 12 years, probably longer. The operation became more sophisticated over time, which suggests he was learning, adapting his methods to avoid detection. 12 years. While I was planning dinner parties and attending charity galas, my husband was facilitating criminal enterprises. While I was volunteering at the library and tending my garden, he was meeting with people who broke kneecaps for a living. The cognitive dissonance was nearly unbearable. "Mrs. Sullivan, there's more." Carol's expression softened slightly, her professional detachment giving way to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "The $10 million Robert left Victoria, that money came directly from laundered funds. If the FBI discovers this, they'll seize everything as proceeds of criminal activity." The room started spinning. Everything, the house, the investments, all of it, tainted by association with criminal activity. All of it potentially forfeit to the government. Unless what Carol looked uncomfortable, her fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on her laptop. Unless Victoria and Kevin's legal team already knows about this and is planning to use it as leverage. If they tip off the FBI about your husband's crimes, they might be able to negotiate immunity in exchange for cooperation. My daughter and her husband weren't just thieves. They were holding a nuclear weapon over my head, preparing to obliterate what remained of my life if I didn't capitulate to their demands. What are my options? Legally, you could contact the FBI yourself. Come forward voluntarily and hope for leniency. You'd lose most of the money, but you might keep the house if you can prove you had no knowledge of the source of funds. And if I don't, Victoria and Kevin's lawyers will probably leak this information strategically. You'll lose everything anyway, but you'll also face potential charges for unknowingly benefiting from criminal activity. I thought about Eleanor Hayes' smug confidence, her certainty that I'd accept their settlement offer. They'd known about Robert's crimes all along. known and prepared to use that knowledge as ammunition if necessary. Carol, how did they find out about this? Kevin's an investment banker. He'd have recognized the patterns in your husband's financial records. The question is, what are they planning to do with this information? My phone rang, Victoria's number. I answered without hesitation, putting it on speaker so Carol could hear. Mom, we need to meet tonight. There are things you need to know about Daddy that change everything. I already know, Victoria. Silence. Then cautiously, you know what I know about the money laundering. I know about the criminal connections. I know that everything your father left us is tainted. The line hummed with tension. I could almost see Victoria recalculating, adjusting her strategy in real time. Mom, listen to me carefully. Kevin's lawyers have been in contact with the FBI. They're willing to let us renegotiate our situation. What kind of renegotiation? Kevin gets immunity in exchange for providing information about Daddy's criminal network. You get to keep $5 million in the house. The rest goes to the government, and the fraud charges disappear. We all walk away from this mess. It was brilliant in a sociopathic way. Victoria had turned my moral victory into her strategic advantage. She'd use her father's crimes to escape the consequences of her own leaving me with just enough to appear generous while protecting herself from prosecution. Victoria, you're asking me to help you profit from your crimes by exploiting Daddy's crimes. I'm asking you to be practical. The alternative is losing everything and potentially facing charges yourself. I looked around Robert's study, seeing it clearly for the first time. The expensive furniture, the rare books, the art collection, all of it purchased with blood money. The life I'd lived, the comfort I'd enjoyed, all built on a foundation of criminal activity I'd been too blind or too compliant to question. I need time to think. Mom, the FBI meeting is tomorrow morning. Kevin's lawyer needs an answer tonight. After hanging up, I sat in the darkness of Robert's studies, surrounded by the evidence of his double life. 43 years of marriage to a stranger. A daughter who'd inherited more than money from her father. She'd inherited his talent for deception, his moral flexibility, his willingness to use others as stepping stones to get what he wanted. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated who I was when my back was against the wall. When all the social conditioning to be agreeable to compromise, to keep the peace, fell away, leaving only the steel core that had always been there, hidden beneath layers of accommodation and self-effacement. I picked up the phone and dialed Carol Chen's number. Carol, how quickly can you get me a meeting with the FBI? I have a story to tell them, and I think they're going to find it very interesting. FBI agent Sarah Martinez looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for a federal investigator. Serious, intelligent, and completely immune to charm. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. Her suit was impeccably tailored, but deliberately unremarkable, and the only jewelry she wore was a simple watch with a leather band. She sat across from me in Harrison's conference room, recording our conversation and taking notes with mechanical precision. Her questions were direct, her manner professional, but not unkind. Mrs. Sullivan, you understand that by coming forward voluntarily, you're potentially admitting to benefiting from criminal proceeds. I understand, but I'd rather tell you the truth than let my daughter and her husband manipulate this situation to their advantage. I laid out everything. Robert's hidden business dealings, Victoria's fraud scheme, Kevin's forgeries, the extortion attempt masquerading as a settlement offer, the threats from Eleanor Hayes about revealing Robert's criminal activities during the trial. Agent Martinez listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, but otherwise giving no indication of her thoughts. When I finished, she reviewed her notes before looking up at me with an evaluating gaze. Your daughter believes she can trade information about your husband's crimes for immunity from her own charges. That's exactly what she believes, and she thinks I'll cooperate because I'm afraid of losing everything. Agent Martinez smiled for the first time. Not a warm smile, but the satisfied expression of a predator who's just spotted prey. Are you afraid, Mrs. Sullivan? The question hung in the air between us, carrying more weight than its simple words suggested. Was I afraid of losing my home, of facing criminal charges, of discovering that my entire life had been built on lies, Agent Martinez? In my professional opinion, you're a woman who refused to be victimized. That's not terrible. That's inspiring. Fear is no longer my primary emotion. What is anger? Pure crystallized anger at being manipulated by people who underestimated my intelligence for decades. Agent Martinez's smile widened, showing teeth for the first time. Mrs. Sullivan, would you be willing to wear a wire? 3 hours later, I was sitting in my living room with a recording device taped to my chest, waiting for Victoria and Kevin to arrive for what they thought was a surrender meeting. The technician had shown me how to adjust the tape to prevent it from pulling against my skin when I moved, how to position myself to get the clearest audio, which words to use to ensure incriminating statements were captured clearly. Agent Martinez and 3 other FBI agents were stationed in a van down the street monitoring the transmission. Harrison was at his office ready to move forward with whatever legal steps became necessary. Carol Chen was parked 2 houses away, serving as additional backup in case something went wrong. They knocked at exactly 8:00 p.m., both dressed like they were attending a business dinner. Victoria wore a conservative black dress that likely cost more than a month's mortgage payment, while Kevin was in a charcoal suit with a subtle pinstripe. He carried a briefcase that probably contained immunity agreements and settlement papers. I opened the door, inviting them in with a calm smile that revealed nothing of the anxiety bubbling beneath the surface. The wire felt obvious against my ribs, though the technician had assured me it was undetectable beneath my sweater. Mom, you look better than you have in weeks. Victoria kissed my cheek like nothing had happened, like she hadn't thrown me out of my own home, like she hadn't told me to find somewhere else to die. I feel better. Clarity has that effect. Kevin opened his briefcase with the efficiency of someone who'd conducted similar negotiations before. Documents were arranged in neat stacks, labeled with color-coded tabs for easy reference. The organization reminded me painfully of Robert. Margaret, our lawyers have structured this very favorably for you. You retain the house, $5 million in clean assets, and complete immunity from any charges related to Robert's activities. Clean assets. That's an interesting phrase. Victoria shot Kevin a warning look, her perfectly manicured nails digging slightly into his arm. A silent command to tread carefully. Mom, the important thing is that we're all protected. The past stays buried and we all move forward. What about the $33 million that Robert actually left me? Mom, that money is tainted. It can't be separated from Daddy's criminal activities. Taking $5 million is the best outcome possible. And you two, what do you get out of this arrangement? Kevin leaned forward, his confidence returning as he moved into familiar territory, explaining complex financial matters to someone he considered intellectually inferior. We get to put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind us. Victoria's charges disappear. My reputation remains intact and our family can heal. Misunderstanding. He was still calling felony fraud a misunderstanding. The audacity of it took my breath away. Kevin, helped me understand something. What's that, Margaret? When exactly did you discover Robert's criminal activities? What do you mean? I mean, did you know about the money laundering when you married Victoria? Or did you discover it recently when you were planning to steal my inheritance? Kevin and Victoria exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Kevin cleared his throat, straightening his tie in a nervous gesture. Margaret, I don't think that's relevant to our current discussion. Actually, I think it's very relevant because if you knew about Robert's crimes and said nothing, that makes you an accessory after the fact. And if you only discovered them while committing your own crimes, that makes you remarkably unlucky. Victoria's composure was starting to crack. Her right eye twitched slightly, a tell I'd recognized since she was a child trying to lie about who broke the neighbor's window. Mom, what are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that you two have been planning this for months, possibly years. The forged will, the money laundering discovery, even Kevin's connections to document forgers. None of this was spontaneous. That's ridiculous. Is it Agent Martinez finds it quite plausible? The color drained from both their faces. Victoria's hand froze halfway to her water glass. Kevin's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed convulsively. Agent Martinez. Kevin whispered the name clearly familiar to him. FBI. She's been very interested in my story about systematic elder abuse, fraud, and extortion, particularly the part where you tried to blackmail me with my dead husband's crimes. Kevin stood up abruptly, reaching for his briefcase with trembling hands. Papers slid from their neat stacks, disrupting the orderly presentation he'd prepared. Margaret, this conversation is over. Actually, Kevin, I think it's just beginning. Agent Martinez and 2 other federal agents entered my living room as Victoria and Kevin sat frozen in place. The briefcase Kevin had been reaching for was confiscated immediately along with both their phones. Agent Martinez read them their rights while her colleagues applied handcuffs. Victoria Sullivan Hayes and Kevin Hayes, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion of a federal witness. Victoria turned to me with an expression of absolute betrayal, as if I were the one who had violated a sacred trust. Her mascara was already beginning to smudge as tears welled in her eyes. Mom, how could you do this to your own family, the same way you could forge legal documents and steal my inheritance, sweetheart? Except my way is legal. As the agents led them toward the door, Kevin tried one last desperate play. He turned back, his face twisted with a combination of fear and malice. Margaret, you don't understand what you've done. There are people connected to Robert's business who won't appreciate federal attention. You've put yourself in danger. Agent Martinez paused in reading them. Their rights, her expression hardening. Mr. Hayes, are you threatening a federal witness? I'm warning her about the reality of her situation. The reality, Agent Martinez said, is that you just added witness intimidation to your charges. After they were removed, Agent Martinez sat back down across from me. The other agents had gone with Victoria and Kevin, leaving us alone in the sudden quiet of my living room. She removed the small microphone from beneath my sweater with efficient movements, placing it in an evidence bag. Mrs. Sullivan, Kevin's warning might not be entirely empty. Your husband was connected to some dangerous people. How dangerous? The Torino crime family primarily. They've been using legitimate businesses to launder money for decades. Your husband's consulting firm was one of their most successful operations. The name meant nothing to me, but the agent's expression told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't some minor criminal enterprise. This was organized crime of the highest order. Are you saying I'm in actual physical danger? Potentially, but there's something else you should know about your husband's operation. Something that changes everything. Ahad Martinez pulled out a thick file folder, the kind that suggested months of investigation. The cover was stamped with classified in bold red letters. Mrs. Sullivan, your husband wasn't just laundering money for the Torino family. He was an FBI informant. The words didn't register at first. They seemed to hover in the air between us, disconnected from any meaning I could grasp. What? For 12 years, he was providing information about their operations while appearing to facilitate their money laundering. The operation was so sensitive that even local FBI offices weren't informed. The world tilted sideways. Robert, my Robert, was working for the FBI. Deep cover, long-term investigation. The secrets he'd kept weren't just from the criminal world, but from me as well. To protect me, or because he couldn't trust me with the truth. Your husband was helping us build cases against multiple crime families. His information has been instrumental in several major prosecutions. But the money was real. The crimes were real. Agent Martinez nodded, acknowledging the complexity of the situation. The FBI allowed him to keep a percentage of the laundered funds as payment for his cooperation and to maintain his cover. Everything he left you was earned through legitimate federal cooperation. I stared at her, trying to process this revelation. Robert wasn't a criminal. He was a hero, or something in between. A man walking a moral tightrope, doing the wrong things for the right reasons. So the $33 million is legally mine. Yes, your husband died before the investigation concluded, but his cooperation over 12 years directly led to 47 arrests and the seizure of over $200 million in criminal assets. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because the investigation was ongoing and because we weren't certain about your involvement or knowledge. Your daughter and son-in-law's fraud scheme actually helped us confirm your innocence. Victoria and Kevin didn't know any of this. They suspected criminal activity, but they had no idea about the federal cooperation. They were planning to blackmail you with information that would have actually exonerated your husband. The irony was so perfect, it was almost poetic. Victoria had tried to steal my inheritance twice, once through fraud and once through blackmail based on incomplete information. Each time she'd been thwarted by forces she couldn't have anticipated. Agent Martinez, what happens now? Now you get your money back. Your daughter and son-in-law face federal charges, and you get to decide what kind of life you want to build with your legitimate inheritance. And the danger Kevin mentioned, the Torino family will be too busy dealing with their own legal problems to worry about you. We're executing search warrants across 3 states tomorrow morning. Your husband's final intelligence report is proving invaluable. I looked around my living room, seeing it again as the site of my resurrection rather than my humiliation. The place where I'd refused to be a victim, where I'd fought back against those who thought they could use me as a pawn in their games. Agent Martinez, can I ask you something? Of course. In your professional opinion, am I a terrible person for feeling satisfaction about Victoria's arrest? Agent Martinez smiled a genuine expression that transformed her serious face into something warmer, more human. Mrs. Sullivan, in my professional opinion, you're a woman who refused to be victimized. That's not terrible. That's inspiring. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my renovated house making coffee for two. The morning sun streamed through new windows that actually opened properly, illuminating countertops I'd chosen myself for the first time in 43 years. The pale blue paint on the walls reflected my preference for cool colors, replacing the warm beiges Robert had insisted upon. Good morning, Margaret. Dr. Sarah Chen Carroll's sister and my new financial advisor appeared in the doorway carrying a thick folder of investment reports. Unlike Carol's practical suits, Sarah favored vibrant colors and interesting accessories. Today it was a turquoise blazer with a geometric scarf reflecting her more creative approach to financial management. Good morning, Sarah. Ready for our quarterly review, the past 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media interviews, and personal transformation. Victoria and Kevin were each serving 18-month federal sentences in minimum security facilities. Their reduced sentences were the result of plea deals that avoided the need for a trial sparing all of us, the public spectacle that would have resulted. The news coverage of their crimes had made me something of a celebrity in senior advocacy circles. My story, carefully edited to protect the classified aspects of Robert's FBI work, had resonated with older Americans who feared financial exploitation from family members. Your portfolio is performing excellently, Sarah said, settling at my new breakfast table. The charitable foundation is fully operational, and the scholarship fund has already selected its first recipients. The Margaret Sullivan Foundation for Elder Protection had become my primary focus. Using $15 million to my inheritance, we were funding legal aid for seniors facing family financial abuse and supporting legislative changes to strengthen elder protection laws. The work gave me purpose direction in a community of like-minded individuals who valued my experience and wisdom. Any word on the documentary Netflix confirmed the production deal. They want to start filming next month. My story had captured media attention far beyond the initial news coverage. The Mother's Revenge, an American crime story, was being developed as a limited series with the proceeds going to elder advocacy organizations. The producer had assured me they would focus on the fraud and betrayal aspects rather than Robert's classified work, which remained protected by confidentiality agreements I'd signed with the FBI. And Victoria Sarah's expression grew careful. She pushed her glasses up on her nose, a habit she displayed when approaching difficult subjects. She's written again. Her lawyer says she wants to apologize and ask for forgiveness. Victoria had written me 17 letters from federal prison. I'd read the first few, which ranged from self-justifying to desperate, before deciding to stop opening them. Some contained pleas for money to improve her prison conditions. Others attempted to explain her actions as temporary insanity brought on by grief. The most recent had begun exploring the possibility of forgiveness and reconciliation. I'd stopped reading because I'd stopped caring. Some relationships, once broken, can't be repaired with words. Sarah has my stance on that changed. Not according to our previous conversations, but people do evolve, Margaret. Even people who've made terrible choices. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. Grieving dependent, willing to accept whatever scraps of dignity my family offered me. That woman might have felt obligated to forgive Victoria to rebuild a relationship based on guilt and tradition rather than genuine respect. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth. Someone who refused to be manipulated by appeals to emotions that no longer held power over her. Sarah scheduled a meeting with Victoria's lawyer, not to reconcile, but to make something clear. What kind of thing? I want Victoria to understand that her actions had consequences beyond legal punishment. I want her to know that she destroyed our relationship permanently and that her children will grow up knowing why their mother went to prison. That seems harsh. Good. It's supposed to be harsh. Victoria made adult choices that hurt people she was supposed to love. She doesn't get to escape the emotional consequences just because she's written some prison letters. Sarah made notes in her leather portfolio, her expression carefully neutral. We developed a good working relationship over the past months based on mutual respect, rather than the condescension I'd experienced from most financial professionals in the past. And the grandchildren, Victoria's requested supervised visits with them. My relationship with Victoria's children would be complicated. They were innocent in all this, yet they were being raised with the values that had produced Victoria and Kevin. Already at 8 and 10, they displayed the sense of entitlement that had been their parents' downfall. My relationship with Victoria's children will be based on their choices when they're adults, not their mother's rehabilitation efforts. The doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a delivery truck with a large package. Must be the new furniture for the studio, I told Sarah. The art studio had been my favorite renovation project. Robert's former den was now a bright, airy space where I was rediscovering my love of painting, something I'd abandoned when I got married, and assumed the role of supporting wife and mother. Margaret, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret how this all played out? The prison sentences, the media attention, the permanent family estrangement. I considered the question while signing for my delivery. 6 months ago, I'd been invisible, a widow with no money, no home, and no prospects. Today, I was a millionaire philanthropist with a foundation, a documentary deal, and a purpose that extended far beyond my own survival. Sarah, my daughter, tried to steal everything I owned and leave me homeless. My son-in-law created forged documents and threatened me with blackmail. They showed me exactly who they were when they thought I was powerless to stop them. But they're still family. No, they're still DNA. Family are the people who protect you when you're vulnerable, not the people who exploit your vulnerability for profit. Sarah closed her portfolio, satisfied with my response. She gathered her things, preparing to leave for her next appointment. Besides, I added, look what I became when I stopped allowing them to define my worth. After Sarah left, I walked through my house. Really my house now decorated according to my taste, organized around my priorities. The heavy mahogany furniture was gone, replaced by lighter pieces that complemented the abundant natural light. The hunter green walls in the study had given way to a soft sage that felt like a breath of fresh air. The formal dining room had been converted to a library filled with books I'd always wanted to read but never found time for. In the art studio, I uncovered my latest painting, a self-portrait of a woman standing in bright sunlight, her face turned toward the future. The woman in the painting looked nothing like the grieving widow who'd packed her life into 2 suitcases 6 months ago. This woman looked powerful, independent, unafraid. She looked like someone who discovered her own strength, not in spite of adversity, but because of it. The woman I'd become wasn't defined by her relationship to others, not as Robert's wife or Victoria's mother or Kevin's mother-in-law. She was defined by her own choices, her own values, her own vision for the future. She was finally and completely herself. Outside, the sun was setting behind trees. I'd planted myself in soil that belonged to me, on property I'd defended through intelligence and courage, rather than inherited through marriage or birth. Tomorrow, I'd continue building the life I'd chosen rather than the life others had planned for me. And if Victoria wanted to rebuild a relationship with this woman, she'd better bring a lot more than prison letters and hollow apologies. She'd better bring a complete transformation, one that matched my own. Because I'd discovered something vital in these past months. When you finally know your own worth, you stop accepting anything less than what you deserve. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming everything your enemies never thought you could be. The summer heat stretched across the lawn, warming the flagstone path I'd installed last month. 6 new rose bushes lined the walkway, their buds promising vibrant blooms in the coming weeks. I'd selected them myself from the nursery across town. American beauties with deep crimson petals, a deliberate departure from the pale pink varieties Robert had preferred. These roses would be bolder, more assertive in their beauty. Like me. 1 year had passed since Victoria's confession on my porch. 1 year of rebuilding, of transformation, of claiming spaces, both physical and emotional, as exclusively mine. The Margaret Sullivan Foundation had expanded beyond my initial vision, now operating in 7 states with a dedicated staff of 15. Our legal advocacy program had already helped 34 seniors recover assets from predatory family members. Our legislative initiative had contributed to the passage of enhanced elder protection laws in 2 states, with more pending. And I had changed too. The timid woman who once deferred to everyone's judgment but her own had vanished, replaced by someone who made decisions without seeking approval, who occupied space unapologetically, who recognized her own worth without needing external validation. Sarah Chen's car pulled into the driveway precisely at 10, her punctuality as reliable as her financial advice. She emerged carrying her customary leather portfolio today, paired with a linen dress in a shade of coral that complemented her complexion. Sarah had become more than a financial advisor over the past year. She was the closest thing to a friend I'd allowed myself since this transformation began. Margaret, we have excellent news. The latest quarterly returns exceeded our projections by 12%. Sarah spread financial statements across my kitchen table, the numbers confirming what she'd just announced. The investment strategy she developed, more aggressive than Robert had ever permitted, was yielding remarkable results. 40% in blue-chip stocks providing stability, 30% in bonds for reliable income, 20% in carefully selected real estate investments, and 10% in venture capital funding, innovative elder care technologies. The foundation's endowment has grown to 18 million. We're now self-sustaining through investment returns alone. That milestone meant we could expand our programming without touching the principal. The Elder Advocacy Hotline, we discussed the Emergency Housing Fund for seniors facing eviction by family members, the educational campaign warning about common exploitation tactics, all could move forward immediately rather than in stages. What about the scholarship program? Sarah flipped to another section of her portfolio. We've selected 12 recipients for the fall semester. The eldest is 72, returning to complete a nursing degree she abandoned 50 years ago to raise her family. The Margaret Sullivan Scholarship for Late Bloomers specifically targeted older adults pursuing education they'd postponed for family obligations. Each recipient received full tuition plus a living stipend, removing the financial barriers that often prevented seniors from pursuing long-deferred dreams. I'd designed the program thinking of the art degree I'd abandoned when I married Robert, a path not taken that had haunted me for decades. CNN called again about featuring the foundation on their Making a Difference segment. I'd been reluctant to embrace the media attention, preferring to focus on the work rather than becoming the face of elder advocacy. But Sarah had convinced me that visibility served our mission. Each interview prompted hundreds of calls to our hotline from seniors recognizing their own vulnerability in my story. Tell them I'll do it, but only if they highlight the systemic nature of elder financial abuse. This isn't about one daughter stealing from her mother. It's about a culture that renders older women invisible and expendable. Sarah nodded, making notes in her elegant handwriting. The documentary producers also delivered the rough cut for your approval. Shall we watch it after our meeting? The Mother's Revenge had evolved from a simple Netflix documentary into a 4-part series examining elder financial abuse through multiple lenses. My story anchored the narrative, but the producers had expanded the scope to include interviews with experts, other survivors, and even reformed perpetrators. The final episode explored solutions, both individual and societal, for protecting vulnerable seniors. The doorbell chimed, interrupting our conversation. Through the frosted glass panels flanking the front door, I could make out the silhouette of a woman, petite, well-dressed, her posture radiating authority despite her small stature. Sarah checked her watch. That must be Elise Morgan from the district attorney's office. She's early. I'd been expecting this meeting, though not necessarily looking forward to it. Elise Morgan was the prosecutor handling Victoria and Kevin's parole hearings scheduled for next month. After serving 12 months of their 18-month sentences, both were eligible for early release, a possibility that stirred complicated emotions I was still learning to navigate. Elise Morgan proved to be younger than I'd expected, mid-30s at most, with a sharp bob and sharper eyes that missed nothing as she took in my renovated living room. Her handshake was firm, her manner direct without being abrupt. Mrs. Sullivan, I've reviewed the case files thoroughly. Both your daughter and son-in-law are model prisoners. They've completed all required programs, participated in voluntary community service within the facility, and secured employment and housing arrangements for their release. The information wasn't surprising, but still landed like a stone in my stomach. Of course, Victoria would be a model prisoner. She'd spent her entire life perfecting the art of appearing exactly as others wished her to be. The perfect daughter in public, the perfect student, the perfect wife, the perfect mother. Only those closest to her glimpsed the calculation beneath the performance. They've both expressed remorse. Victoria has completed 200 hours of elder care volunteer work within the prison system. Remorse or strategic behavior modification. Victoria knew exactly what boxes needed checking to secure early release. The real question was whether any fundamental change had occurred beneath the surface performance. What does the prosecution recommend? Elise crossed her legs, adjusting the crease in her perfectly tailored slacks. Legally, we have no grounds to oppose parole. Their behavior meets all criteria for early release. However, as the primary victim, your statement will carry significant weight with the parole board. The power of that position wasn't lost on me. A year ago, I might have felt obligated to forgive, to take the high road, to demonstrate maternal love by welcoming Victoria back with open arms regardless of her actions. The old Margaret would have written a glowing statement supporting early release, would have prepared the guest room for Victoria's return, would have absorbed all the pain while facilitating everyone else's comfort. That Margaret no longer existed. I'm not opposing their parole, but I won't be supporting it either. They can serve their full sentences or be released early based on their own merits. I'm removing myself from the equation. Elise nodded, making a note in her leather-bound notebook. That's certainly your prerogative. There's one more matter we should discuss. Victoria has requested modification of her release conditions to allow direct contact with you. Currently, the terms of Victoria's eventual release prohibited any direct contact with me. No visits, calls, texts, or emails. Any communication had to flow through her attorney or probation officer. Kevin faced similar restrictions regarding contact with me, though his conditions allowed supervised visitation with their children. I see no reason to modify those conditions. Elise studied me with professional detachment. Mrs. Sullivan, I've prosecuted many family fraud cases. Maintaining permanent separation is unusual in parent-child situations regardless of the severity of the crime. Most families eventually attempt some form of reconciliation. Most families haven't experienced what we did. My daughter told me to find somewhere else to die because I was useless to her. Those words can't be unheard. The conviction in my voice must have registered because Elise simply nodded, closing her notebook with a decisive snap. I'll convey your position to the parole board. They'll make their decision next month. After Elise departed, Sarah and I moved to the media room to view the documentary Rough Cut. The space had previously been Robert's billiards room, though he'd rarely used it. Now it featured comfortable seating, excellent acoustics, and a large screen perfect for viewing films or hosting small gatherings for the foundation. The documentary opened with aerial footage of my neighborhood gradually zooming in on my house while my voice narrated the beginning of the story. The producers had convinced me to record the narration myself rather than hiring a professional. Authenticity carries more weight than polish, they'd argued. Hearing my voice now steady and authoritative, I had to admit they were right. The 4-hour series moved chronologically through the betrayal, the legal battle, the revelation about Robert's FBI work, carefully edited to protect classified information, and finally the rebuilding of my life. Interspersed throughout were expert commentaries on elder abuse patterns, financial exploitation tactics, and the psychology of family betrayal. In the final segment, the camera followed me through the foundation offices, capturing interactions with staff and clients. My interview with a senior who'd recently recovered assets from an exploitative nephew brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition of how far we'd both come. The documentary ended with me in my art studio working on the self-portrait Sarah had seen months earlier. As the camera pulled back to reveal the completed painting, my narration delivered the closing thought. The truest form of justice isn't punishment. It's thriving despite those who deemed you disposable. When the screen faded to black, Sarah turned to me with damp eyes. This is going to change lives, Margaret. Women will watch this and find the courage to stand up for themselves. I hope she was right. If my public humiliation and subsequent resurrection could prevent others from experiencing similar betrayals, perhaps some meaning could be extracted from the pain. My phone chimed with a text message from Harrison Fitzgerald. His timing was impeccable as always. Judge granted final approval for the Victoria Sullivan Hayes Amendment to Elder Protection Statutes. Takes effect next month. The amendment, informally named after my daughter by legislators familiar with my case, strengthened penalties for family members who committed financial crimes against seniors and expanded the statute of limitations for bringing such cases. Harrison had worked tirelessly to shepherd it through the legislative process, testifying before committees and drafting language that could withstand legal challenges. We celebrated with lunch in the garden. Sarah had brought sushi from my favorite restaurant downtown, another new experience I'd embraced in this year of transformation. Robert had always insisted that raw fish was dangerous and unrefined. Now I savored the delicate flavors while discussing the Foundation's next initiatives with Sarah. The mail arrived mid-afternoon, delivered by a postal carrier who'd become familiar with the Foundation's expanding correspondence. Among the usual business envelopes was a hand-addressed letter bearing a federal prison postmark, Victoria's 18th letter since her incarceration. Unlike the previous 17, I decided to open this one. The stationery was standard prison issue, the handwriting unmistakably Victoria's, the elegant penmanship she'd perfected in private school, each letter precisely formed. The content, however, was anything but familiar. "Mother," it began, not "Mom" or "Mommy" as in her previous letters. "I've been informed that you're neither supporting nor opposing my parole. Your neutrality speaks volumes about how completely I destroyed your trust. Perhaps that's the fairest response I could hope for after what I did. Prison has provided ample time for reflection. Initially, I blamed everyone but myself, Kevin for encouraging the scheme, Daddy for setting the trap in his will, you for being so easily manipulated throughout my life. I created elaborate justifications that allowed me to maintain the fiction of my own moral superiority. Therapy has stripped away those comfortable lies. The truth is simpler and more painful. I valued money over family. I viewed you as an obstacle rather than a person. I betrayed every principle of basic human decency for financial gain. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. What I did was unforgivable by any reasonable standard. Instead, I'm writing to acknowledge the truth of what happened and to accept full responsibility without qualification. When I'm released, I'll respect your boundaries. I won't attempt contact unless you initiate it. I've seen the news about your foundation and the changes to elder protection laws. Your transformation is remarkable and well-deserved. Victoria, no tearful pleas for reconciliation. No manipulative references to family bonds or grandchildren. No subtle attempts to reframe her actions in a more sympathetic light. Just a straightforward acknowledgement of wrongdoing and acceptance of consequences. If it was a strategy, it was a new one for Victoria. I folded the letter and returned it to its envelope, uncertain how to feel about this apparent evolution. People could change. I was living proof of that. But Victoria had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of telling people exactly what they wanted to hear. Was this genuine growth, or merely her most sophisticated manipulation yet? The question lingered as I prepared for my weekly video call with Victoria's children. Despite the estrangement from their mother, I'd maintained regular contact with my grandchildren through supervised video chats arranged by Kevin's mother, Eleanor Hayes. Our initial interactions had been awkward and strained, but over time we developed a tentative relationship based on honesty rather than pretense. I never spoke ill of their parents during these calls, but didn't pretend nothing had happened either. When 10-year-old Emma had asked why her mom and dad were away, I'd explained in age-appropriate terms that they had broken laws related to money and were facing consequences. When 8-year-old Ryan had asked if their actions meant he was bad too, I'd reassured him that children weren't responsible for their parents' choices. Today's call began with their usual exuberance. Emma had won her science fair with a project on renewable energy, and Ryan had scored his first soccer goal of the season. Eleanor hovered at the edge of the frame, her expression perpetually sour despite the careful truce we'd established for the children's sake. After 15 minutes of light conversation, Emma's expression grew serious. "Grandma Mom says she's coming home soon. Will you visit us then?" The innocent question carried complex implications. In Emma's world, familial relationships could be damaged but not permanently severed. Adults who fought eventually reconciled. Mothers and daughters ultimately forgave each other, regardless of the offense. In her worldview, my continued estrangement from Victoria was the abnormal element, not Victoria's criminal behavior toward me. Eleanor's influence, no doubt. I choose my words carefully, aware of both the children's feelings and Eleanor's watchful presence. "I'm glad your mother will be home soon. You've missed her very much. Whether I visit depends on many factors, but my relationship with you won't change. We'll still have our weekly calls. Eleanor's barely audible sniff communicated her disapproval, but she remained silent. Our unspoken agreement, civility for the children's sake, held firm despite her obvious desire to intervene. After the call ended, I retreated to my art studio seeking solace in the one space that had never been contaminated by family drama. The afternoon light streamed through the skylight I'd installed, illuminating the canvas I'd been working on for weeks, a landscape depicting the view from a mountain peak looking down at the winding path that led to the summit. The climb represented in careful brushstrokes, each switchback and steep section, rendered with meticulous attention to detail. I lost myself in painting for hours, adding shadow and dimension to the rocky outcroppings near the summit. The process calmed my mind, allowing thoughts to settle like sediment in still water. By the time I cleaned my brushes and stepped back to assess my progress, I'd reached a decision about Victoria's letter. In my study, no longer Robert's space but truly mine now, with bookshelves filled with volumes I'd selected and artwork that reflected my tastes, I composed a response to Victoria. Not a letter accepting her apology or offering forgiveness, but a clear statement of boundaries and expectations. Victoria, I wrote, I've received your letter. Your acknowledgement of responsibility is noted. If genuine, it represents progress from your previous position. If you are released on parole, these are my conditions for any potential future contact. First, complete transparency regarding your finances. Any attempt to conceal assets or income will end all communication permanently. Second, regular sessions with a therapist specializing in narcissistic personality traits. I'll require confirmation of attendance and genuine participation. Third, public acknowledgement of your crimes. No sanitized versions that minimize your actions or shift blame. Fourth, demonstrated change through actions, not words. Volunteer work with elder communities. Financial contributions to elder protection organizations from any income you earn. Fifth, respect for my independence. No attempts to insinuate yourself into my daily life or foundation work. Contact will be limited and on my terms exclusively. I make no promises regarding forgiveness or reconciliation. Those may never come. What I offer instead is a potential path toward a different kind of relationship, one based on truth rather than manipulation, on respect rather than exploitation. The choice is yours, Margaret Sullivan. I sealed the envelope without rereading the contents. The old Margaret would have softened, the language would have included reassurances of maternal love. Despite everything, would have left openings for Victoria to negotiate more favorable terms. That version of me had died the day Victoria told me to find somewhere else to die. The following week brought another meeting with Elise Morgan. This time she arrived with news about Kevin's case rather than Victoria's. Mrs. Sullivan, there's been a significant development. Kevin has offered to provide testimony against several of his former business associates in exchange for a reduction in his sentence. The information wasn't particularly surprising. Kevin had always been primarily concerned with self-preservation. His loyalty extended exactly as far as his personal interests. What kind of testimony? Elise consulted her notes. Evidence of widespread securities fraud within his former firm. Apparently, the document forgery techniques used in your case were regularly employed for other fraudulent purposes. He claims he can provide documentation implicating senior partners in multiple financial crimes. And what does he get in return? Potential reduction of his remaining sentence to time served, modification of some parole conditions, impossible immunity from additional charges that might emerge during the investigation. The prosecution's eagerness was understandable. If Kevin's claims were true, his testimony could lead to charges against much bigger financial predators than my son-in-law. The fraud that had nearly destroyed my life would become a footnote in a larger investigation of corporate malfeasance. Would this affect Victoria's case? Elise hesitated, her professional mask slipping momentarily to reveal discomfort. That's the complicated part. Kevin's testimony includes claims that Victoria was the primary architect of the fraud against you, that she approached him with the plan already formulated, and that she had been planning it for months before Robert's death. He's throwing her under the bus to save himself. Elise didn't disagree. It's a common tactic in these situations. Spouses often turn on each other when legal consequences become real. The revelation should have angered me, but instead I felt a strange detachment. Of course, Kevin would sacrifice Victoria to protect himself. That's who he'd always been. Charming and supportive when it benefited him, ruthlessly self-interested when circumstances changed. Victoria had chosen him, had partnered with him in both life and crime. Now she was experiencing the consequences of that choice. Would Kevin's deal affect the terms of Victoria's potential parole? Not directly. But if his testimony becomes public before her hearing, it could influence the parole board's perception of her role and her candor about the crimes. So Victoria might serve her full sentence while Kevin walks free, based partly on his testimony painting her as the mastermind. The irony wasn't lost on Elise either. Justice isn't always equitable, Mrs. Sullivan. Sometimes it's just the least bad outcome we can achieve within an imperfect system. I considered my options. I could intervene, could tell the prosecution that Kevin was equally culpable, could insist that any deal he received should extend to Victoria as well. The old Margaret would have done exactly that, would have protected her daughter even at the cost of broader justice, would have prioritized family loyalty over everything else. The woman I'd become made a different choice. I appreciate you informing me, Ms. Morgan. The prosecution should proceed as you see fit. My only concern is that the larger fraud investigation doesn't overshadow the elder abuse aspects of their crimes. Elise nodded, seemingly relieved by my response. We're establishing a dedicated elder fraud division within the DA's office, partly inspired by your case. Your foundation's advocacy made a compelling argument for specialization in this area. The knowledge that some systemic good was emerging from my personal trauma offered a measure of comfort. Individual justice might be imperfect, but institutional change could protect countless others from similar exploitation. After Elise departed, I retreated to my garden, seeking peace among the roses that were now blooming prolifically. The deep red blossoms caught the afternoon sunlight, their petals creating shadows that reminded me of the complexities of my new life. Beauty and sharpness coexisting, each dependent on the other for meaning. Sarah's car pulled into the driveway an hour earlier than expected for our scheduled foundation meeting. Her expression as she approached, brow furrowed, lips pressed tight, warned of unwelcome news before she spoke. Margaret, Victoria's attorney, just held a press conference. She's publicly confessed to orchestrating the fraud against you and has asked the court to ensure that Kevin's deal doesn't reduce his responsibility. She specifically requested to serve her full sentence, regardless of what happens with Kevin's case. Sarah handed me her tablet, cued to a video of the press conference. Victoria stood beside her attorney, dressed in prison khaki that couldn't disguise her innate elegance. Her hair had grown out from its prison cut, the artificial highlights gone, revealing the natural chestnut shade she'd inherited from Robert. Without makeup, with the harsh fluorescent lighting of the prison media room, she looked both older and somehow more authentic than I'd seen her in years. I want to clarify the record regarding the crimes committed against my mother, Margaret Sullivan. While my husband, Kevin Hayes, was an active and willing participant, I was the primary architect of the fraud. I approached him with the plan, convinced him of its merits, and drove its execution. Any attempt to characterize me as following his lead is false and self-serving on his part. Victoria's voice remained steady, her gaze direct into the camera. No tears, no dramatic displays of remorse, just a clear statement of facts. I've written to the parole board withdrawing my application for early release. I've also instructed my attorney to inform the court that I believe my full sentence is appropriate given the severity of my actions. My mother deserves justice, not expedient legal maneuvering designed to minimize my accountability. The press conference ended abruptly after that statement, with Victoria's attorney refusing to take questions. The video froze on Victoria's face, composed, resolute, and bearing a dignity I hadn't expected to see. "What do you make of this?" Sarah's question pulled me from my thoughts. I'm not sure. It could be genuine accountability, or it could be a calculated move to appear noble while preventing Kevin from controlling the narrative. With Victoria, it's always been difficult to separate performance from authenticity. Sarah settled into the garden chair beside me, her expression thoughtful. Does it matter whether her motivation is genuine remorse or strategic image management? The effect is the same. She's accepting responsibility and consequences. The question lingered as spring turned to summer, bringing with it Kevin's early release and the media circus that accompanied his testimony against his former colleagues. True to form, he positioned himself as a reluctant participant In both the corporate fraud and the scheme against me, a man led astray by stronger personalities now heroically helping the authorities uncover broader criminal activities. Victoria, meanwhile, remained in prison, serving her full sentence without further public statements. Her 18th letter to me was followed by a 19th, then a 20th, each one reflective rather than manipulative, each acknowledging specific harms without seeking immediate forgiveness. As her release date approached, the documentary series premiered on Netflix, quickly becoming the platform's most-watched new release. My phone filled with messages from women across the country sharing similar stories of family betrayal and financial exploitation. The Foundation's hotline received record call volumes, necessitating the hiring of additional staff to handle the influx. The publicity brought unexpected opportunities. A publishing house offered a substantial advance for a memoir. A national speaking tour was proposed by a prestigious lecture agency. Several universities requested my participation in symposiums on elder justice and financial protection. The spotlight that had initially felt uncomfortable now served as a platform for advancing causes I genuinely believed in. Through it all, I continued my morning ritual in the art studio, working on a series of paintings exploring themes of transformation and resilience. My technique improved with practice, my confidence growing with each completed canvas. The local gallery that had initially agreed to show my work as a courtesy to a wealthy patron now eagerly promoted my upcoming exhibition on its artistic merits. Alone. 2 weeks before Victoria's scheduled release, I received notification that she had accepted all 5 conditions outlined in my letter. Her therapist confirmed regular attendance and meaningful participation in sessions addressing narcissistic traits. Her financial records had been submitted for complete transparency. She had arranged to volunteer with an elder care organization upon release. And most surprisingly, she had recorded a video interview about her crimes that would be used in the Foundation's educational materials. No sanitized version, no excuses, just unvarnished truth about the exploitation she had attempted. The day before her release, I sat in my study considering whether to attend the moment Victoria walked out of prison. The old Margaret would have been waiting at the gates, eager to smooth over the awkwardness, ready to absorb whatever emotional turbulence might emerge. The new Margaret recognized that Victoria's re-entry into society was her journey to navigate, not mine to manage. My decision crystallized as I reviewed the final edits for my memoir scheduled for publication in the fall. The manuscript ended not with forgiveness or reconciliation, but with self-discovery, the recognition that sometimes healing requires distance rather than closeness, boundaries rather than unlimited access. I would not be at the prison gates. Instead, I'd send Sarah as my representative carrying a brief note. Your acceptance of my conditions is noted. We'll proceed one step at a time with no guarantees. Margaret, the morning of Victoria's release, I stood in my art studio before the completed self-portrait that had become the visual anchor of my transformation. The woman in the painting looked directly at the viewer, her gaze steady and unflinching. No artifice, no performance, no accommodation, just authentic presence. Behind her, the sun created a halo effect that emphasized her emergence from shadow into light. The gallery had already sold the painting to a women's advocacy organization that planned to display it in their headquarters, a symbolic representation of female resilience in the face of betrayal. The price they'd paid would fund a year of scholarships for senior women returning to education after raising families. My phone chimed with a text from Sarah. She's out, received your note, asked me to tell you she understands and respects your position. No drama, no tears, very composed. What next? What next indeed? The question had occupied my thoughts for weeks as Victoria's release approached. Would we attempt to rebuild some version of a mother-daughter relationship? Would we maintain formal distance while acknowledging our biological connection? Would we simply go our separate ways, connected only by legal documents and shared DNA? I didn't have a definitive answer yet, and perhaps that was appropriate. The journey that had begun with Victoria's betrayal had taught me the value of patience, of allowing situations to unfold naturally rather than forcing resolutions to ease my own discomfort. What next? One day at a time. No rushing toward forgiveness that might not be warranted. No clinging to anger that might eventually prove limiting. Just presence with what is and careful attention to what might be. I texted back a simple response. Thank her for respecting boundaries. I'll contact her when, if I'm ready. No timeline promised. Setting down my phone, I turned back to the new canvas I'd been preparing. Larger than any I'd attempted before, with a complex composition sketched in pencil on its surface. The image depicted a labyrinth seen from above its winding path, leading eventually to a central open space. Unlike traditional labyrinths with a single entrance and exit, this one featured multiple potential paths, some interconnecting, others remaining separate throughout their course. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it spoke to my current understanding of relationships and reconciliation. Some journeys could only be traveled alone. Others might converge after periods of separation. The important thing was recognizing that each person walked their own path according to their own truth, neither rushing ahead to force reunion nor deliberately creating obstacles to prevent it. I mixed paints on my palette, selecting a deep blue for the background sky above the labyrinth. As I applied the first brushstrokes, I felt a sense of peace that had been elusive since Robert's death. Not the peace of perfect resolution or tidy endings, but the more authentic peace that comes from accepting complexity and uncertainty as natural elements of human experience. The foundation would continue its work. The documentary would reach new audiences. The memoir would tell my story in my own words. Victoria would either demonstrate sustained change or reveal that her apparent transformation was merely another performance. Kevin would either find redemption or repeat his patterns of self-interest and exploitation. The grandchildren would form their own judgments as they matured, and I would continue becoming the woman I was meant to be all along, not defined by my roles as wife, mother, or victim, but by my choices, my values, and my willingness to stand firmly in my own truth regardless of others' expectations. Outside my studio window, the roses I'd planted swayed in the summer breeze, their deep red petals catching the morning light. Unlike the pale pink varieties Robert had insisted upon, these blooms didn't wilt at the first sign of harsh weather. They were hardier, more resilient, their beauty enhanced rather than diminished by their capacity to withstand adversity. I dipped my brush into the crimson paint, adding depth to the center of the labyrinth, the destination that could only be reached through patience and persistence. The journey through betrayal and resurrection had taught me that the most meaningful transformations rarely follow straight lines. They twist and turn, double back, and move forward again, sometimes bringing us to places we never expected to find. My phone chimed with another message. The gallery owner confirming arrangements for my upcoming exhibition. 47 paintings would be displayed, each representing an aspect of my journey from invisible supporter to visible creator. The show had already generated advanced press, with critics noting the emotional resonance of work created by someone who had found her artistic voice late in life. Better late than never. The thought brought a smile as I continued painting, adding definition to the labyrinth's paths. The old Margaret would have apologized for taking so long to discover her own capabilities, would have minimized her achievements as just dabbling or nothing special. The woman I'd become recognized the value of her creative expression without qualification or diminishment. As afternoon approached, I cleaned my brushes and stepped back to assess my progress on the canvas. The labyrinth was taking shape, its complexity emerging through layers of color and shadow. Not finished, not even close, but clearly underway, with a defined vision guiding each brushstroke. Like me, like my relationship with Victoria, like the foundation's work, like life itself. I closed the studio door and walked through my garden, passing the roses I'd planted and the flagstone path I'd designed. Each element represented a choice made according to my preferences rather than someone else's expectations. Each plant, each stone, each color reflected the woman I'd become rather than the roles I'd previously inhabited. Tomorrow, the foundation board would meet to discuss expansion into 3 new states. Next week, I'd begin the speaking tour associated with the documentary release. Next month, advanced copies of my memoir would arrive for final approval before publication. And somewhere in the city, Victoria would be beginning her own journey of reintegration and accountability, navigating the consequences of choices made and actions taken. Whether our paths would eventually reconnect within the labyrinth remained to be seen. For now, it was enough to know that I was walking my own path with purpose and dignity. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had instead revealed a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The capacity to stand alone without fear, to establish boundaries without guilt, to prioritize my own well-being without apology. The truest revenge against those who deemed me disposable had been discovering just how indispensable I was to myself.